This is Hidden Valley, and here are my astronomical observations from 2007 to 2010. The Hidden Valley Archaeological Complex near Moab, Utah, was created on the formations at the left of this picture. Here, between 1, 2, even 3,000 years ago, basket maker Indians created dozens of rock art panels and several structures now in ruins. In March 2007, I began going to Hidden Valley to look for astronomical markers among the rock art and the ruins. I had already found markers at other basket maker sites, and I knew this was a major basket maker collection of art, so I went to look. This presentation documents what I found up to December 26, 2010. Indian astronomers of the Southwest used the play of light and shadow on the rock art and structures to mark the equinoxes and solstices. At Hidden Valley, the basket maker Indians used two formations to create these interactions. I call the two formations the Observatory on the left and the gnomons, or the gnomon ridge, on the right. A gnomon is any object which by the position or length of its shadow serves as an indicator, especially of time. The observatory is a horseshoe-shaped formation. The open end faces west towards this picture. The observatory has petroglyphs on both south-facing walls, and there are at least 6 ruins at the site. The best one is at the lower left of this picture, that ruin right there. Unlike the more recent Anasazi builders 100 miles to the south, basket maker builders tended to use a rougher construction style using the undressed stones. This next picture shows some Anasazi style construction from Cave Tower at Cedar Mesa, and you can see how they smooth those stones out compared to the basket maker structures, which just use the natural rock and hammer that out. This is a really interesting ruin. It might be a site. These people are in the ruin, or right next to the ruin. And there is another ruin under this ledge at the lower left, and I will discuss it later. Could be another observation point right there. This picture facing west was taken from the site of the first astronomical marker that I identified. And I call this panel Raven Eats the Sun. Two glyphs come into play here. The large sheep on the left and the concentric circles there on the right. A recurring theme in Southwest rock art is known as I see the light. It happens when a glyph receives the panel's first light on its face. An example of I see the light is at a panel I call the goose panel, and this light box comes down on the equinox and frames that large sheep's face. So he sees the light right after dawn, and then the light is off his face for a while. That is the I see the light phenomena there. It's a fairly well-known example. And here on the Raven Eats the Sun, there is a different kind of phenomena, the I see the dark. I'll discuss that in a second. The gnomon for this panel is formed by a small bump on the wall, and it is somewhat nondescript, sort of triangular formation there. Shortly before sunset on the equinox, this large sheep, rather than seeing the light, seems to see the dark. The shadow from that gnomon reaches across the surface, and now the sheep is in the dark. The shadow continues to move towards the circles, starts to eclipse them, and then as it engulfs them completely, it forms the silhouette of a raven's head. And this is what we call raven eats the sun. The following time-lapse sequence was taken on March 19th, 2010. You can see the shadow approaching the sheep on the left, and then it intersects the sheep's head, and the sheep sees the darkness. The light extends across the panel and nears the concentric circles. At 7:10 p.m., it almost engulfs them. At 7:12, Raven has eaten the sun. The position of the raven eats the sun seems to vary slightly from year to year, and this may be due to slight annual wobble in the Earth's axis. Further observation might be able to track the variation, but this slight imprecision might induce some doubt as to the panel's astronomical validity. However, the presence of other markers in Hidden Valley suggests that Raven eats the sun is neither accidental nor lacking in purpose. An interesting winter solstice marker is called the Pounce Panel. All these names are my names, by the way. The Pounce Panel has an excellent predator track on it, and this panel is on the outer wall of the horseshoe formation, and it is the second marker that I identified at Hidden Valley. The Pounce Panel is on a platform about 30 feet above the surrounding cliff, and it is the first panel to receive the winter solstice light at Hidden Valley. From this location, the winter solstice sun rises from the southernmost peak of the La Salle Mountains and then disappears behind the Gnomon Ridge across the canyon. But from the Pounce Panel, you can see the sunrise on the winter solstice, and then you can see it disappear behind the Gnomon Ridge. It's another example, perhaps, of I see the light and then I don't see the light. There are two anthropomorphic figures on the Pounce Panel. There they are. The one on the right is a little hard to make out. The one on the left, his style elements like the missing arms and legs, the halo, the etched and abraded surfaces resemble what is variously known as the archaic barrier canyon or desert culture. The other glyph to the right is also abraded. This earlier culture may have been in the Moab area for several thousand years. It gave way to the basket maker tradition about 2,000 years, but the archaics may have taught the basket makers about astronomy. The stylized track at the left side of this panel may have a link to the next astronomical marker, which is only about 100 yards to the west on the same wall. This is a large predator track, the segmented feet, the tined toes, the claw marks, and he's also metaphysical because, after all, he does have 7 toes. This is the largest one of these, resembling these footprints in the area. Many variations of the track occur in Hidden Valley and all through basket maker country, in fact. And here is the shadow at the winter solstice. This is the last panel to get illuminated at Hidden Valley. The shadow is above, the light is below, and the sun rises from the highest point of the Gnomon Ridge, creates an arced shadow above the glyph, and then the glyph becomes the last glyph to get the winter solstice sun as the sun comes over the ridge, and everything on the rock art is illuminated on the rock art walls. The area to the right is too soft to hold any rock art. There is an etched star above the track and a pecten etched glyph to its right, and this type of etched art is more consistent with archaic styles than with basket maker. So there's some hinting here that perhaps there was some archaic astronomy at this site before there was basket maker astronomy. While some panels are pretty obvious, others are more suggestive and not quite so obvious. One example is this panel on the outer wall. It is one of the first glyphs to receive the equinox light. And what happens is the sun kind of rises up that arched swell, and as it rises up, it comes under the feet of that large sheep and then carries that sheep up and to the left into a vaginal shape. If this is a fertility symbol, it works for me. Further down the wall, but nearby, right next to the big lion track, in fact, is the ray panel. And what we can see here is a basket maker panel. About 100 feet west of the big track. As the sun clears the rim above, the ridges on the surface of this wall catch the equinox light at an oblique angle, and in this time-lapse sequence, it looks like rays or bolts coming down, similar to the divine blessings that we might see and think of in our own religious lexicon. And here's an example of the spring equinox of 2009. You can see the light starting to spread down the wall, but the larger figure on the right and the very large figure on the left, especially the one on the left, is in a shallow depression in the wall, and although the light blooms all around it, it is the last figure to be illuminated. Most equinox panels only register on the day of the equinox. Because of this light effect is oblique, this panel works several days before and after, but it definitely works best on the equinox. And let's just look at that again. I think this is a really beautiful image. The main figure's headdress is similar to one that appears on the nearby Raven Eats the Sun. There's a hair bun and a little quail feather. And over by Raven Eats the Sun, we see a figure there. And I have seen this headdress at other astronomical panels in the Moab area, including the snake panel, which I talk about at some point, not in this show, but in another show. Could this style have been a totem of social status and identified with astronomers? As with the Pounce panel and the Big Track sites to the east, the Ray panel was pecked over an earlier culture's rock art. Here you can see, we'll zoom in on his head, and here you can see a circular shape with a grid inside it. It is a common symbol for an addle with a fletching for a throwing spear. And here is a tower-shaped head with a grid inside connected to the bottom of a set of shoulders, the wide shoulders of the typical archaic figure and vertical body fill. This supports the idea that Hidden Valley may have been an astronomical site long before the basket maker era of 1000 BC, and that this site was used as an astronomical site for maybe up to 4,000 years. This is one of my all-time favorite astronomical sites. I call it the White Temple. In November 2009, I examined this ruin at the base of the inner wall. It is made of stacked, undressed limestone slabs like basket maker, and the hillside below it was paved with this white limestone. I call it the White Temple. Looking southeast, I suspected that the ruin may be related to the Noman Ridge. So on December, here the inner wall rises above the ruin. On December 24th, I put my tripod down and waited for the sunrise. The deep gap is where the trail comes through, but to the right is the deepest ridge gap, and at 8:54 a.m., the sun rose in the bottom of that gap from the White Temple. This picture was taken 3 days after the solstice, when the sun had begun moving back to the north or left, so a more precise observation. This may be an extremely precise marker for the winter solstice, if it actually does rise in the absolute bottom. Still, it is a wonderful, wonderful vision. You have about 10 days for most solstice markers. 2 days later, I photographed the dawn light on the White Temple, and the ruin is at the bottom of that V shape of light at the base of the wall. As I watched, I noticed that the shadow from the tallest Noman was intersecting with another ruin. This ruin is under this ledge, just below the circular ruin at the beginning of the slideshow, and the limestone slabs in the foreground were part of the wall and structure. A person inside the ruin would see the sun rising from the top of a Noman from that cave, much like the winter solstice sunrise at the Big Track site. As the Noman shadows moved right, they transfer energy from one place to another, and I could see that gnomon moving down and to the right onto the outer wall, and as the shadow moved down towards the base of the wall, I went to take a look. There it's coming down the wall. That last picture, the V, I wasn't able to get there. There are places I haven't been to. The top of the shadow nears the base of the cliff, and it is shadowing a basket maker panel there. And these icons are common Hidden Valley. They represent a line of people wearing necklaces and belts. It's a very common basket maker motif. At the time the glyphs were created, only the necklace and belt were pecked. The rest of the body was probably painted, as in this example from Moab's Mill Creek. You can still see the paint on him. The gnomon shadow is at the top of the photo. The rock art panel is at lower left. The shadow comes down. The sun rises from the top of the gnomon, and there the hand holders are in the light. It now seems possible to me that each peak and valley in the gnomon's shadow may have been associated with one or several glyphs and or ruins at the winter solstice. From my observations to date, interesting possibilities include some of the following, but I haven't had time to go there. Here's a line of sheep on the highest panel on the western end of the outer wall. Right there you can see he's in the bottom of that cleft. This glyph of supernatural three-horned sheep, and they are located right in the bottom of that gnomon cleft. This panel, which I have named the Spirit Sheep panel, a very important panel, and it seems to appear, as I can see from a distance, in the bottom of that V shape. This ruin about halfway along the outer wall. Maybe he is looking at the top of a gnomon there. There may be a winter solstice duty for the ray panel as well. We can see that before that last light hits the gnomon, there's a little gap there, and it shines for just a moment onto the ray panel, but I haven't been up there to see the whole sequence. The large formation to the northwest of Hidden Valley is known as the Old Folks' Home. The dog is Girlfriend, my buddy's dog. And there are many glyphs and several ruins at the Old Folks' Home that I haven't had time to get to during solstices or equinoxes. But there are quite a few rock art and ruin remains there at the Old Folks' Home. But the one there on the west flank is really one of the more interesting panels. There's a large spirit sheep down to the spirit deer here, down to the left. And there's a whole line of necklace and belt figures. Perhaps one or several of these sites relates to the canyon's horizon to the southwest where the winter sun sets. But I have not been there to see that. To date, I have not associated the ruins on the top of Hidden Valley with any astronomical markers, but I think that may be just because I haven't been there. Maybe next year, if I live so long. Given their location, such associations would not seem surprising. Another archaeological site due west of Hidden Valley, which might provide an interesting vantage for the equinox sunrise. It's about a mile west of Hidden Valley. This photo was taken from that site, and you can look back to the east and see the observatory and the gnomons and the old folks' home there on the left. Girlfriend was a great hiking partner. She's no longer with us. I miss her so much. Hidden Valley has presented a number of intriguing astronomical possibilities, and I hope that this presentation will engender interest and involvement in this unique and wonderful place. Rory Tyler, March 2011.